This is the Lakers Central Podcast, powered by Crossover Media. Get the best analysis on the 17-time world champion Los Angeles Lakers. Subscribe to Lakers Central on your favorite podcast app or listen at crossoverpodcast.com. Now, let's talk Lakers with your hosts, Alex and Vinay.
So Vinay, Dennis Schroder had his first Lakers press conference the other day. It was all via Zoom. They're not doing anything in person right now, but of everything that came out of that press conference, he mentioned wanting to start and that he had done the bench thing for the last couple of years. And he also mentioned that his agent had already talked to the Lakers around the time that the trade was being, proposed or going through. And so naturally, that then prompted everybody on Lakers Twitter and probably national media as well. I haven't checked them out yet today, but basically everybody that I follow started talking about, should he start? Shouldn't he start? What does this mean? How come he's just not buying into whatever the Lakers want? For all we know, the Lakers guaranteed him a starting spot. Who knows? We don't know yet. We don't know anything yet. But how are you doing, man? And how did you receive that news when it came out the other day?
I am doing good, Alex. I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody listening is doing well. The season is back. It's upon us, and it's upon us because everybody on NBA Twitter, Laker fan, non-Laker fan, has decided to tell the Lakers how they need to run their rosters and their lineups in order to win a championship, which was the routine last year, which is going to be the routine this year. So I think you covered it. Schroder specifically mentioned in that, or one of the things that got kind of pulled out of the excerpt is that he had done that bench, six man off the bench thing for 2 years already in OKC. And then the other key part was there was a conversation prior to him kind of agreeing to the trade to the Lakers, because he had some good things to say about Sam Presti too as well as OKC, that he knew that he was getting moved around. And for anybody who didn't get a chance to read it, Danny Green said very similar things about Rob Pelinka, that he knew that he would eventually get moved. Rob had kind of let him know well in advance that his names would start maybe possibly popping up in some trade destinations and stuff like that. So I'm not surprised that Schroder wants to start for the Lakers. He is one of those guys who's like kind of gotten, because of what OKC was running and because of the fact that they had Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and then Lou Dort that they're playing in that off-ball position, it made more sense for him to come off the bench. So I understand why he wants to start. I'm actually okay with it. I really don't have a problem with him wanting to start if that's the direction that Vogel goes in. I think the conversation about the lack of offensive punch off the bench is a valid concern that Laker fans are voicing. But one of the things that I've been trying to do, not aggressively, maybe I'll do it in writing form for Laker fans specifically, is don't think of him as a sixth man. Think of him as the Lakers' third best scorer and their second playmaker before you think of him as a sixth man. Because if you think of him as our secondary playmaker and you think about him as our third best scorer or third most capable scorer, and he may be tied with Montrez for that role specifically, depending on who the matchup is at night. When you start ranking sort of his roles in that regards, the secondary playmaker part is the one that jumps to sort of the top of the list. And if you watch the Lakers last season, which I know a lot of Laker fans did, one of the biggest problems that we used to have at the start of games was not that the Lakers would start off slow defensively. They'd actually start off really, really good defensively in a lot of the games that we played. But the main issue that we used to have is our offense would be really stagnant. They would come in very, very cold. If Bradley or Green didn't hit an early three, or if Anthony Davis wasn't getting some easy buckets at the rim initially, or if the Lakers couldn't get out in transition initially, generate turnovers, however they ended up doing it, that ended up being a situation that resulted in like very slow starts. Vogel would have to start bringing guys off the bench, stuff like that. For the most part, that didn't happen very often, but it was something that could happen to the Lakers situation. And the way I see it is this will put LeBron in a situation where now he can be on the wing, or he can be like not the guy who has to bring the ball up the court. So if he wants to go into the post up early to work a matchup, or if he wants to kind of get out in transition and run the outlets so somebody can advance the ball out to him, whether it be KCP or Wes, or even a guy like Schroder or Marc Gasol with a long outlet pass, which he likes to do as well. That's a benefit to the Lakers because they want to score fast. They want to score in transition. And it's easier to pick up Braun 94 feet from the rim because he's a bigger guy and they'll usually put a smaller guy onto him. And that's sort of part of the issue with having Braun at point guard. We saw it happen more in the playoffs. More teams tried to put a small guy on Braun and check him for 94 feet. So it slows the Lakers' whole offense down. By the time he gets past the timeline, there's only 18 seconds left on the shot clock. So now the offense is now starting later and later. So that helps alleviate some of that stuff. All in all, in entirety, I think moving Schroder into the starting lineup is not a problem. I think what we will see though is we may see Schroder and Anthony Davis's minutes be matched up much closer than similar to kind of how we saw with Rondo and Anthony Davis. You couldn't play Rondo without one of Braun or AD on the court, or both of them on the court. And I think that's what we're going to see with the Lakers. We'll probably see a slight change in their rotation lineups and substitution patterns, but for the most part, the idea will still be the same.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at the starting lineup, I think most Lakers fans thought, we're getting the runner up to 6-man. Schroeder's going to come off the bench because we needed some bench firepower. But I think if indeed he's starting, my first thought was probably KCP and West starts, just because that's kind of what the Lakers did last year. But if they're going to really change things this year and start Schroeder, probably LeBron goes to the bench a little earlier this year, and their minutes will probably be down to at least start the season anyway. LeBron and Anthony Davis's, but if you start the season with LeBron and Schroeder both on the court at the same time, to your point, the Lakers' offense this past season was bogged down a number of times. If they didn't get out in transition, or LeBron and Anthony Davis, didn't combine for 50 to 60 points a night, it was really tough to win. Now, more times than not, they got it done. But I don't think it's reasonable to expect that those guys should be doing all that heavy lifting in a shortened season, coming right back after winning the championship. So Schroeder, I think, adds a dynamic, takes some of the pressure off of LeBron. And I think we looked at last season also. One of the big reasons Rondo was on the roster is because LeBron wanted to play a little bit off ball. That was number one. And number two, Anthony Davis wanted to play with another guy that could set him up. And Schroeder can do those things, and he can also score. So I think you'll probably see minutes staggered a bit. And I still think that you'll see Schroeder play with the second unit. This isn't where you start and then you're never going to play with the second unit guys. What you end up seeing is LeBron or Schroeder at all times be matched up with Trez or somebody like that. So Trez and Kuz can continue to get those easy baskets. And I wouldn't be so concerned about the second unit not having a scoring punch. Trez should be coming off the bench. That's 18 points. If Kuzma does what I hope that he does this in his fourth season, that's another guy off the bench that should be able to give the Lakers 15 points a night. Mm-hmm. Scoring this year should not be an option for this, be an issue for this team. They've got too much firepower this particular season.
Yeah, I think if it's just one of those situations where the Lakers are trying to preserve a lead that the starters build up, or if the Lakers are just trying to extend the lead, maybe against a bad team, when their bench unit comes in and the Lakers bench is running. I think that's part of the thing that it's, and I do the same thing too. I think all NBA fans do this. Whenever we think about lineups in hypothetical scenarios on paper, we always think we're stacking stats on top of each other, right? So it's better to have Schroeder and Montrez because those guys are basically 20-point scorers off the bench. And so, but it doesn't make sense for us to put Schroeder next to Braun and AD because those are two 30-point scorers and a 20-point scorer. Do we really need that much scoring, right? And I think the easiest way to look at it is Schroeder, by starting a game next to Braun, he can just function as a facilitator role. He can just come in, set up Braun, maybe take some open threes if teams start doubling AD and Braun early in the game, if that's part of their strategy or whatever it may be, and just kind of run the motions. So one of the examples I try to bring up to the timeline is there's a concept of warm bodies, right? Like a warm body concept. I'm not an old guy. I'm in my 30s. I'm under 35, but I'm still at an age where I got to kind of warm up if I go play pickup basketball and stuff like that, right? I got to stretch and all that sort of stuff. Schroeder's obviously younger, but you can see even with younger athletes, they have these guys go through serious regimens where they have to build some game rhythm before going in. And one of the things that the Lakers lacked is they didn't have rhythm guys that used to get into games and immediately start lighting it up, right? So that was one of the issues with Kuzma. When Kuzma would come off the bench and come onto the court, some games he'd be like good to go. His legs look good. He's attacking the rim, making his threes, all that sort of stuff. But then there would be some games where he just came out shooting cold. Same thing with Danny Green, right? Like that was the biggest frustration with Danny Green in the playoffs. Some games he looked good, some games he looked bad. There was no consistency to it. And part of that issue comes from like your game rhythm, your game reps. If Danny Green is starting off games or Kuzma starting off games or starting his minutes off purely playing defense, right? Just being focused on playing defense the entire time, it's harder for him to build a rhythm. Same thing can kind of happen with Rondo. It's the same thing that happened with AD. When AD would start games for the Lakers, depending on what the matchup was, they'd either go to him early or they wouldn't. And then when Rondo would come in, then all of a sudden they would go to AD. But because AD didn't get enough shots up, his rhythm wasn't there. And so one of the things that I think having Schroder on the court helps both AD and LeBron do is they can focus just on scoring. Defend your guy and just score. And Schroder is one of those guys, because he is a six man, where he doesn't need, because he usually just comes in and starts lighting it up, because that's basically why he was a six man candidate. He doesn't need like the shooting aspect of getting warm in game rhythm, because it's natural to him scoring. He loves to get to the rim and that sort of stuff. But the warming himself up to get to that point is still something that every player needs to do. So if he's just on the court, just defending, setting his guys up, he's warmed up. So as soon as LeBron hits the bench and Frank starts calling a bunch of pick and roll plays, he's ready to go. There's no issue. He's already been running up and down the court. He's built his lather. He's like gathered himself up. And if AD's been getting his shots up, that transition should be better, right? The trend last year was the Lakers start with Bradley and Green next to LeBron and AD. They build a lead, or like 5-6 point leads. In some cases, they build like a double-digit lead, and then Rondo would come in, and it would be Rondo and AD, and like Kuzma and Caruso, whatever combinations they'd use, and that lead would get cut in half like almost immediately. And so I think what the Lakers can do better, and what they probably learned, that the Schroder situation also sort of helps out, is how do we stagger guys, which is what we did last year, but how do we stagger guys in a smart manner so we're always keeping a consistent flow of quality offense on the court? Because one of the things that the Lakers had to do last year is if they were in really tight games, usually at the beginning of that third quarter is when like the clamps would come out. Like they would be playing like super hardcore defense at the beginning of the third quarter, and then they'd build up a big enough lead. And there's no other, the best measurement I can give for Laker fans to use as a reference is 57-0. If the Lakers can if the Lakers can hold a good enough lead or preserve a good enough lead going into fourth quarters, LeBron and AD are going to bring you home. So we're not too worried about that. We just have to make sure that we clean up all the stuff up until that point, at least. Even with their reduced minutes, I would expect them still to play fourth quarters if they're not blowouts and stuff like that. So that's the way I'm sort of thinking of it. I think Rob has done an excellent job so far, putting guys in the situation where they can putting guys as well as Frank Vogel in a situation where he can have that consistent rolling offense. And I think adding guys like Schroder and Montrez are going to allow guys like Caruso and Kuzma to be more effective in their roles, because now they won't have to worry about, oh crap, they just cut our 13-point lead to a 7-point lead. Somebody has to score. So now you're starting to act out of character and stuff like that. If a 13-point lead gets cut to like a 10 or 11-point lead, you're still playing with the same sort of offensive rhythm and stuff like that. You're not worried or tightening up because of the pressure that the opposing team's putting on you. So it's, I think it's a good move. But hey, Vogel's number one measurement of whether you get minutes on this team is, are you playing defense? So if Schroder comes out and plays zero defense and he's getting picked on and he's getting blown by repeatedly, and it's putting the Lakers in a tough position, he won't hold that spot regardless of how he feels. And I like to think that Laker Nation is observant enough, especially after last season, where they'll be calling, openly saying, hey, Schroder's not defending his spot. I don't know if it makes sense to keep him in that spot. So I'm actually curious to know who's going to be the guy that plays next to him, if it's going to be Wes or if it's going to be KCP. But I'm good with Schroder, man. I think he's one of the excerpts that came out of his conversation was he said that his favorite players were Chris Paul, Rajon Rondo, and I think he said Tony Parker was one of them also. And that is an that is an excellent crop of guys because so many, obviously Chris Paul's one of the greatest point guards of all time, but like Rondo was a crafty guy and the high hustle, high IQ guy. Tony Parker was the epitome of craftiness because he wasn't a super athlete or like a guy who's going to, like, at least in his advanced age, who's going to like blow by you with his first step. He's the guy who I like to say sort of perfected that short hop layup, the one where you take the layup off the wrong foot so that the blocker can't get to you. Like I've seen Schroder do that before. And I was just like, oh, that's a Tony Parker kind of layup to prevent shot blockers from being able to block your layup attempts from behind. So hearing that he has that kind of mentality, and those are the guys that he kind of looks at and stuff like that, and then the fact that obviously he played behind Chris Paul. Mm-hmm. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I know you and I, when we specifically discussed the Schroder trade the very first time around, one of the jokes that I made, which it doesn't seem like it's a joke anymore, is I wonder if LeBron called Chris Paul and asked, hey, is Dennis Schroder ready to is he ready for the spotlight? Is he ready to play like a real point guard role? In your opinion, it wouldn't surprise me if Chris Paul said, yeah, this guy's ready. And that was part of the process of them signing off on that trade for Schroder. And, that would be Chris Paul's assist to LeBron. But now that I think about it, hearing Schroder talk about Chris Paul and him saying that he learned so much from Chris Paul, it's like, wow, I wonder if LeBron did call Chris Paul and say, hey, is he ready for this role that we have envisioned for him? And Chris Paul said, yeah, like he's ready. He knows how to play, and he knows how to play the game the right way. So he's been a great ad so far, and frankly, I'm just glad to hear that he wants to compete for a starting spot. That's all you can ask for, a competitive guy, both within the team as well as like on the court.
Yeah, I want all my guys, whether they're a superstar or the 15th man, I want them all to try and compete, and they should all want to be a starter. All these guys, no matter where they sit at on the bench, they were all state, they were all something at some point in their career, so they all are competitors. And I'm glad you brought up the Chris Paul thing because I was watching some tape and looking at a bunch of numbers about it. So what I'm going to do is go to the break because I want to talk about LeBron's relationship with Chris Paul and how that relates to Schroder's relationship with Chris Paul and what I think we can kind of learn from that. So Laker Central will be right back. Welcome back to Laker Central. We were talking about Dennis Schroder and his comments about wanting to start and really – really discussing what his role will look like on this team. And so first I want to point out, I think people look at Schroder, Vinay, as like just this hot microwave scorer, kind of like a Lou Williams type. But not only can he get hot, for a couple of years in Atlanta, he averaged 6 assists a game. I mean, he can assist, he can find other guys, but you all the time, you often say, you look at the tape, look at the numbers, you look at them both in connection to one another. And that's what I did when I was preparing for this podcast. And so I was watching how him and Chris Paul interact on the court together. Because if you're talking about him starting and playing maybe 30 minutes next to LeBron and Anthony Davis, particularly LeBron, another ball-dominant guy, I was curious, how that would really look. And Schroder and Chris Paul, they were great together in OKC. Like, I don't know people realize how good they really were together. So when I was watching some of the plays that they would run, like when Chris Paul had the ball, he would often, he would draw the defense in, and Schroder had this knack for kind of finding the open spot on the court, kind of like KCP does, whether it was the corners, the wings. And you saw, I think this year, Schroder's three-point percentage went up a bit this year. He often got open. There were also times where they were running give and goes. Then there were times where Schroder had the ball and he could consistently blow by his man. And that's one thing that his Lakers team did not have. But when he would blow by his man, he could either score at the basket or here was Chris Paul on the other wing or in the corners or somewhere else waiting wide open for Schroder to find him. It worked really, really well together. And I went and looked at the net ratings. And I know that's, it's not the end-all be-all for how good guys play together. But they played 999 minutes together in the regular season and had a net rating of 15.6. And I'm like, that's crazy. Because both those guys, I think Chris Paul's like 6 feet, Schroder's 6'1". They're undersized guys. So offensively, they can kind of do whatever they want. But I thought defensively, they would get picked on. But a net rating like that shows that they were able to hold their own, at least while they were on the court together and in different lineups. I mean, but then like I looked at the playoff data because they're going to be on the floor more. The lineups shrink a bit when you're in the playoffs. You're against better competition. Schroder was in like four of the 5 best lineups that OKC ran. Schroder was involved in those lineups. And I'm talking about net ratings from anything from like 15 to like 40. I mean, the team was just
Yeah.
better with Schroder on the floor, despite having other ball dominant guys, another ball handler on the court. And so I think for Lakers fans out there, I don't think that he takes away from LeBron at all. I think that if anything, he really helps LeBron. So you mentioned this earlier. LeBron brings the ball up the court. The Clippers would do this where Pat Bev would pressure LeBron and eat up a ton of clock, and then the Lakers would run out of time and throw up a bad shot or something like that. With Schroder on the court, you can't do that because Avery Bradley wasn't really known for bringing the ball up. KCP wasn't known. Danny Green wasn't known for that. But if Schroeder's on the court with LeBron, I think that really opens things up for this team.
Yeah, I think the combination of Anthony Davis. So, like, one of the things that the Lakers tried to get away with doing a lot was advancing the ball way before any of their offensive guys could get down the court. If Anthony Davis had a one-on-one matchup with no backside help for the defender, and eventually teams started fronting that, so that pass became much more difficult. And then the Lakers stopped doing it because they didn't want to risk turnovers or even risk Anthony Davis getting hurt trying to jump for like a 50-50 ball or something like that in midair if he was being defended by somebody shorter. So I think the Lakers still want to be able to get those sort of easy opportunities for themselves. And Schroder being a guy who plays heads-up basketball, meaning he's a competent ball handler like Rondo was, so he's not worried. Like he doesn't get his back turned when somebody's trying to full court press him. I don't think people full court press him. And the fact that he's actually a very speedy guy. That was one of the advantages that the Lakers sort of had. And it was something that some teams had difficulty dealing with. The Lakers would bring Caruso off the bench and they would bring KCP off the bench. And the speed change from the starters to the backups was jarring enough where it would cause issues. So the disruptive nature of KCP and Caruso jamming up your passing lanes and stuff like that, as well as the speed of them getting out into breaks, which would then carry over when Braun was playing point guard with the bench lineup with just with Kuzma at the 4 and Dwight Howard at the 5. That speed change was very difficult for them to deal with. And that same speed change is something that Schroeder still presents. He adds to that starting lineup and then carries over into the secondary lineup. That now if you try to do any risky stuff defensively, like press them, trap them, that sort of stuff, now it'll actually hurt you because let's just assume Wes Matthews is going to be the starter, right? Let's say KCP is coming off the bench. Or either one, now you've got guys that are not afraid to put the ball on the floor if you turn it into a 4-on-3 sort of situation or to pull up from 3 as well. And even if you don't do that, if you let Schroeder get behind you, right, with a live dribble. So let's say you go for a steal and you miss it. Pat loves to do it. Beverly, because we mentioned him, Pat Beverly loves to do this all the time. He'll try to do this quick reach before you can get to half court to see if you can poke the ball away. Well, if you don't stay in front of Schroeder, Schroeder's good enough and he's fast enough to get to the rim, use a soft floater, use a pull up, kind of turn the tide against you and turn what would be a 50-50 situation offensively, defensively into a mini 5-on-4 situation. And whether it's Marc Gasol, who's sitting in the dunker spot, or in the corner, like I expect him to be, in the corner 3, he's going to have a lot of room. So the entire idea of the entire defensive plan that you had last season when you dealt with the Lakers because they had JaVale and Dwight on the floor of let's just pack the paint and put a small guy on LeBron so that way it kind of slows down his downhill action. That's going to be gone now because if Schroeder's starting, he's going to basically have either Wes or KCP on one side. You'll have Anthony Davis and Gasol on another side, and LeBron, depending on where he wants to stand, or depending on if Gasol's the guy who's screening, there's going to be a lot of space. And a guy like Schroeder, who can score at 3 levels and is kind of crafty enough, sneaky enough to get easy shots off, he's going to have a lot of room to work with. So either he's going to find an open guy or he's going to score. One of those two things are going to happen. And when you combine that with the fact that the Lakers are going to try to get those easy opportunities, it's a lot of pressure on your defense. It's a lot of pressure on your transition defense, and it's a lot of pressure on your half-court defense if you're already running back on transition. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think the reason, outside of whatever the fact Schroeder wanting to do that, I think it does make sense for the Lakers to go in that direction because if that's what they end up doing, because it just puts so much pressure. Like the Lakers already know what their defensive identity is going to be. They know what they have to do to defend. They know what schemes and their scouts are. The Lakers' advanced scouting team, all the assistant coaches, they do a fantastic job scouting guys out in teams out in advance. And so I'm not too worried about that on that side, the defensive end. Really, it was just keeping a sustainable offense so that we didn't have to rely on unreal defensive efforts to close out games and stuff like that. I love Alex Caruso, but I would love to not have to rely on Alex Caruso every single time,
Right.
For him to make steals, because the word is out now, right? Like last year would have been the year for Alex Caruso to capitalize on people sleeping on his ability to be like an Avery Bradley type defender, which is what I think he is. But now the word is out. Alex Caruso, no matter what NBA Twitter or anti-Laker fans or whatever they want to say about him being a meme or whatever, that's all out the window. He's a champion, and he played a pivotal defensive role on this Lakers team. So now teams are going to know that. When Alex Caruso comes in, you got to be better with the ball. You can't just throw easy passes. You got to be aware that he's coming on the help side. So those kind of things that the Lakers were able to take advantage of because the general audience wasn't paying attention to what Laker fans were trying to tell them about how good he was is now going to be gone. So that means that doesn't mean that he's not as effective as a defender. It just means offensive players will be smarter about it. So if we know that teams around the league are going to be looking at the Lakers defenders and be like, all right, can't attack this guy, you can't attack this guy. We have to fix other parts of our team in order to make it more difficult. And one of those things is by having a better offense, having a better facilitator for Bron and AD. And I think that's like that rising tide effect that Schroder will have for the entire team. And look, he could start with them as a facilitator, and even if he's running with the bench unit, he may not need to score. If Montrez comes in and he's rolling, Schroder may not care. He may rack up 10, 12 assists just setting up open guys the entire time, running to his spots, getting to open areas. And he may be okay with that. I'm sure he's going to want to score, but you know what I mean? Like in the end, like I guess like the Rondo example is the best example. Rondo was a minimum contract player. Everybody thought he was going to be out of the league for sure. And that the Lakers were basically the only reason he was with the Lakers was because of Anthony Davis, which some of that may have been true. But you see what happens when a player is not good, comes to the Lakers, plays his role, does a great job, and what that does for his salary. Like Rondo got an extraordinary salary, probably more than even he could have probably imagined from the Atlanta Hawks. So as long as Schroder does his job, no matter whether he scores at a sixth man rate or not, if he shows himself to be a competent point guard, there will be teams out there that are going to look at him that way as, hey, he can be a starting point guard on our team. Look at how well he played with these guys. And so that's the way
it's a contract year. I mean, it's a contract. I mean, so if you're right, look what Rondo got. None of us thought that. I mean, and if Schroder performs well, that $15 million he's making this year could be $20 million next year, right? I mean, the options are there for him. And I think like LeBron was on what, Spectrum? I think he was on somewhere the other day. And he called Schroder Dennis the Menace. And like the joy in LeBron's eyes, by like Schroder and Mark and these guys on this team now, I mean, that's what excites me. If LeBron's excited, I'm excited. And guys like Rondo played 20 minutes a night last year, man. Like that's a lot of minutes for a guy that he couldn't really score. And then when we got in the playoffs and he was scoring, you got to see like, well, wow, we had a guy that could score and facilitate. Look at how great this team is. But the Lakers are going to have to replace 20 minutes from Rondo, 24 minutes from Bradley, Danny Green, 24 minutes. Now, KCP might start. I don't know what, West played 24 minutes last year for the Bucks. I don't know what they've told him or what he's going to do. But there's going to be minutes there for Schroder, whether it's on with the starters or with the bench. There's plenty of minutes to go around. And I don't know what the team does with Caruso. He certainly has earned more minutes. I know there are a lot of fans out there that want to see more THT, but give the boy time. I'm not there yet. Especially when you've got guys like KCP, Schroder. You've got other guys on this team that can help us win right now. I'm not there yet, but they're going to have to figure these minutes out. But there are minutes there, and I think that you're right. Schroder might come in, and if he's he's got it going. He's 5 for 5, 6 for 7. There's no reason for Schroder to score at that point. But
yeah, and I mean for them, it's like when we talk about load management and minutes management. Like to be honest, it's only two guys that are really going to be doing load managing, minutes managing, right? And so for the rest of these guys, like they're all they're all willing to play. I would imagine they're all willing to play as many minutes as they need to, as long as their body allows and
Right.
it's healthy. I think the Lakers themselves want to try and keep everybody's minutes within like 35 or less minutes, because that's typically the golden number that you want to do, like less than 3/4 of total basketball. But there may be some nights where if the Lakers do get a blowout, they're able to extend minutes to a guy like THT, or they're able to extend more minutes for a guy like Kuzma or Schroder. I don't think they care. I don't think Schroeder's going to be like at the 32-minute mark, and if they're up 10, like he's going to be like, all right, pull me off the court. I think he'll just play, and nothing wrong with that. But obviously the most important part is just to stay healthy. I would say, though, that I'm going to be very, very interested to see how the Lakers sort of integrate like the chemistry part of all of this. Because I think one of the things that was difficult for the Lakers last year was that chemistry. One of the things that we sort of hung our hat on was LeBron and AD are all bought in, chemistry is all important and all that sort of stuff. And so I don't think that's going to be much of an issue here, but we have to acknowledge the fact that there are different personalities now on this roster that are different. And it's not the fact that there could be some friction as it relates to anything. That's not what I think it is at all. But there is a learning experience, right? There's a difference between having 32, 33-year-old guys who know what their role is on a team versus a 27-year-old guy in a guy like Schroder, who is, trying to still, he's got a decent sized contract, but maybe he thinks he believes that he can be in the top 10 of point guards in the league and stuff like that. So I think he's bought in with the Lakers, and I think he's bought in, and I think the Lakers have been very, very careful about making sure they find right personality guys to join this team. But at the same time, Dennis comes from a place in Atlanta and in OKC where I'm sure he's also like he comes off as a confident guy. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't come off as like people can say whatever they want to say. I'm cool with it. Like I've watched some of those OKC games. Dennis loves to talk trash. Like he'll talk trash to opposing players and stuff like that. And sometimes he's the instigator. He's not the guy who's like responding back. He's the guy who's starting it. So it's always interesting to see how those personalities sort of fit. But I agree with you. I saw that snippet from Spectrum on Braun talking about him. Sounds like Braun really wants it. Braun wants a guy like that. And he mentioned that same thing with Wes. That he said that Wes is another guy who likes to get after it. Not a guy who waits for the first team to throw a punch at them. They want to throw the first punch at other teams. So, all in all, I think everything will be great. And I think the number one thing will be making sure everybody stays healthy. Because even aside from the ankles and knees and elbows and faces, which kept getting slapped all year and poked in the eye and all that sort of stuff, the whole coronavirus thing is going to be an issue too as well. So like health is going to be the number one thing. I think I saw an excerpt recently where they asked Luka Doncic, like, what do you think is going to be the most important thing in winning a championship? And he's just like, who's not COVID? Like who remains COVID negative? And I think we've seen with like the NFL, like teams that are getting completely decimated week to week based on whether, their players are being responsible and stuff like that. So that situation, you and I have discussed this on other podcasts, more than anything about the Lakers repeating a championship or how the players are playing and all that sort of stuff. How the NBA manages this COVID protocol, this pandemic season is going to be very, very, it's going to be very interesting to see, because it's hard to believe that all 475 or 50 to 75 players in the league are all on board with, making sure they take care of them. I mean, I'm sure there's guys out there that don't believe that this pandemic is as serious as it is. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see that. And I hope the Lakers, to be honest, all teams, because we want fully competitive basketball and we care about everybody's health. But I hope everybody is able to stay healthy, and I hope everybody is responsible, I guess is the best way I can put it. But health will be the number one priority for the Lakers. Health, chemistry, and that's it. Just preparing for the long run, not trying to burn yourselves out for the marathon. Working for the marathon, not the sprint.
And the Lakers were incredibly fortunate last year that there were no major injuries. And really, that's what has to happen for every title run. Like every title run that any team has, you got to kind of dodge injuries, and they were able to do so. COVID is always going to be looming out there. You hope that these guys take it seriously and they're not off doing things that would put themselves or their fellow teammates in jeopardy. I think in terms of the personalities, Marc Gasol, he's a champion. I don't worry anything about Marc Gasol. Wes also, he does have that connection with his father. Father already playing for the Lakers. I like Wes a lot. I like that Schroder is a little edgy. I think the Lakers could use that kind of injection coming off of a title. What makes me feel good about Schroder beyond the fact that he's a good player is that he was able to play with Chris Paul and make room for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and they'd have no issue. He shared the spotlight, no issues. And in Los Angeles, a much bigger place, there's more spotlight to go around. And if you can share with Chris Paul and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, you can certainly share with LeBron and Anthony Davis. And as Kuzma is showing us, if you do halfway good in Los Angeles, you might get a shoe deal and date models and get a ton of attention and maybe get that big contract. And so I think this team is the way that Rob repurposed this team for a repeat, I think is key. And I think that they're built this year to better sustain an injury. Now, if they take an injury to LeBron or Anthony Davis, it's bleak. I mean, you can't lose your stars when you're trying to win a title. But I think they'll be better equipped to deal with guys missing a few games here or there versus last year when if Anthony Davis missed a game, it was like, LeBron really had to exert a lot of energy in order for us to be competitive just because the Lakers didn't have any other options. So this year is going to be different. But it's crazy that we're 18 days away, I think, from – what is it? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm shaking my head because I'm in disbelief that it's starting back up so soon.
It's not – and look, Anthony Davis still hasn't signed his contract. He's going to. There's no one expects him not to be back with the Lakers. It's just how many years and how they're going to work it all out. And the minute he signs, we'll probably do a podcast and discuss all of that, plus discuss, depending on the length of his contract, what that could mean for another superstar coming to Los Angeles, because there's a lot of noise around Giannis as of our recording right now. So we'll see how that plays out on the timeline. But Vinay, did you have anything else you wanted to throw out there before we close out?
The one thing I want to just tell Laker fans specifically is we are not, or not we, I'll say this for myself and myself only. I know that as we go through the rigors of the season, there's a lot of ups and downs. There are games that we feel that we should win, that we lose, the ones that and then some of the games that we win are like ugly wins. And I think last year was the first year of us going through this roller coaster and stuff like that of trusting and not trusting Anthony Davis, Rajon Rondo, LeBron, Frank Vogel at times, Kuzma at times, all the different players on the roster. We had like these conversations where we were like, are we sure? Like we know like LeBron's going to be great, but are we sure that the rest of these guys are going to be ready, including our staff? And it even extends to Rob Pelinka. Are we sure Rob Pelinka can make the moves to shore up the gaps on this team for us to be successful? And one thing that I'll definitely be doing this season is I won't be riding that roller coaster. Like I'll be riding the roller coaster during the game of, oh, we blew a lead, or, we're blowing them out and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to doubt this team. It's very clear that they have a blueprint and they have an understanding of what it takes to win a championship. And that goes from the players all the way up to Rob Pelinka and to the owner, the governor, Jeannie Buss. So if the Lakers come out slow, or if they're like a middling seed, or if their defense looks like it's not as good as it was last year, and maybe the offense is just slightly better than it was last year, or their shooting percentages, like if AD comes out and he's not shooting 50% from mid-range, I'm genuinely not going to stress it. And, I'll obviously do my best to let Laker fans know that, the whole point of this regular season is just to stay healthy and build chemistry. The playoffs is where it really matters. And I'm not going to participate in that roller coaster, and though I understand some folks will. But I would just encourage fans to look at it that way. And you don't have to. Everybody has different ways of measuring a successful Lakers season. I know a lot of people have said, well, how many games do you think a conversation that's gone on is a lot of people are saying, well, how many games do you think the Lakers will win, in a 72-game season? Some people are like, oh, they could win 60 games. Like I said a number like 50, right? But I don't even know if that's how many games. They may win like 48. They may win like 46, 47. And the only reason I say that is because I don't think they are going to beat themselves up about they're not going to beat themselves over what their regular season seeding is going to be. I think they know all the guys that have chips on their shoulders, those chips are going to be what they use throughout the regular season. The guys that are hungry for championships, that's going to be there the entire time. But I think the most important thing for them probably is just to get some form of home court advantage if they think that the pandemic will be resolved to some degree by the time playoffs roll around and stuff like that, maybe in the summertime and stuff like that. So I think that'll be important. But if they come out and they just start rolling teams from the jump and they look like they're going to be like, they're only going to lose 10 games in the season, that's also great too as well. But I'm not going to stress it. For me, the reason why I'm saying that is because I uniquely was in this situation 20 years ago when the Lakers won their first title with Shaq and Kobe. And all the teams around them also got better. The Kings got better. The Blazers got better. The Rockets got better. And all the conversation that was going around at the time was how these other teams had gotten better and the Lakers had made some moves on the margins. And the Lakers came out a little kind of okay. They would have stretches where they were kind of up and down. And then the conversation came up, well, can the Lakers flip a switch? Is there an actual switch? Is that a real thing? And the playoffs came around and the Lakers flipped a switch. And they rolled teams. So I'm not saying that's what the Lakers are going to do, but I think there is a historical precedence. The reason why I think there's a historical precedence is because Kobe was on that team, which means Rob Pelinka saw that firsthand, how that switch worked. Frank Vogel is a Phil Jackson acolyte, and he said that Phil Jackson is one of his idols. I think he knows what it takes to get to that point. And I think Bron is the smartest guy in the league. He knows what it takes to get to that point. He's played on a terrible organization like the Cavs and played on a more successful organization like Miami. And I think he has enough experience in his 18 years of play that's about to come up where he knows what is it that you have to prioritize. So however this regular season turns out, however anything kind of works out, the number one priority for Laker fans, or at least I would encourage Laker fans, is just see how the small marginal improvements that we make by adding Montrez, by adding Schroder, by adding Wes, the different lineup combinations. Like, measure the Lakers' success on the season based on how those combinations do, so that we feel comfortable going into the playoffs. But don't measure it holistically. Don't look at the whole season, or don't look at the Lakers didn't even lose back-to-back games until December or something like that, where they lost 4 straight in a row on that road trip. If we start losing some back-to-back games here and there all of a sudden, it's okay. I think we're okay. It's just staying healthy and working on that chemistry. That's the way that I'm going to be looking at it. And like I said, that was my long answer to your last few things to say. But I would encourage Laker fans. The NBA had to shorten the season for off season for us, but that doesn't mean we can't keep celebrating our championship up until the finals come around. So until the Lakers are mathematically eliminated from this upcoming season from a championship, we're defending champs. So that's the way I'm going to approach this. And I'm just going to enjoy this season and all the small differences and small marginal things that help us get better.
Yeah, and enjoy this ride. Celebrate the championship. Lakers, a lot of fan bases kicked us when we were down the last decade. So enjoy it. And the way Rob rebuilt this team, clearly he's not taking this next season lightly. He rebuilt this team with the intention of repeating. And in my lifetime, every time the Lakers win one, they repeat. Every single time they at least get 2. And if we're fortunate enough to go back to back, I've experienced 2 of them where I was distinct, as fans of the Lakers, and that would be a great feeling to be able to do that now, especially given that COVID is going on and all the other stuff. But someone has asked me, do I think the Lakers could have the best record or second best record in the league again? And the Lakers can basically do whatever they want. They are talented enough to go for the best record. They're talented enough to be the 4th or 5th seed and still win the championship. It's gonna be completely up to them how they decide to go about this season. It would not surprise me if they still finish the season number 1. I do think teams like the Nuggets are going to go for it this season. I don't know if the Clippers will go for it because they're going to be in a similar boat with 2 superstars. They're going to probably need to rest a bit. But a team like the Nuggets, I could see going for it.
Like the Nuggets, the Blazers,
Mavericks.
the Suns, the Mavericks. Yeah, those teams seem like they would work really, really, really hard to make sure that they're high enough in the conference standings to be able to dictate whether they have home court or at least put enough cushion on themselves where late in the season, if they want to rest their guys as the playoffs come up, because that's typically what teams do. They'll come out guns blazing, and then maybe last 10, 20 games of the season, 10, 15 games of the season, they may want to sit guys just to be safe from getting hurt. They do it in football too, like week 15, 16, they bench QBs and stuff like that. So if that happens, I wouldn't be surprised if some teams come out like just full bore, trying to build as much of a cushion from the top seeds to the 7th, 8th seeds. And some teams are going to try and avoid the Clippers and the Lakers. Like they don't want to play those guys in the early rounds. So there's going to be some brackets, some guys posturing and moving around too.
Well, and the thing is, hopefully the coronavirus is under control by the time the playoffs come around. But if they're not, the league may still do a bubble for the playoffs. And if they do a bubble, home court's out the window again because home court didn't matter for the Lakers this past season. And so, but we're in a good place, folks, and there's likely to be more news coming down the pike. But shout out to Jared Dudley. Lakers brought him back. He's another good guy that, even though he doesn't play a lot, he just fits what the Lakers do. He's great on the bench. I think he's good for Kyle Kuzma also.
Yeah, and
I'm glad he's back.
All in all, because we talked about Schroder, the whole team has been on Schroder. Like deciding whether Schroder should start or be the 6th man is a good problem to have. That's the best way to kind of explain the situation the Lakers are in. I just, you and I both sort of trust Vogel to figure that situation out.
Well, guys, we'll close out on that. You've been listening to Lakers Central.